Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our RJG's three-part webinar series, Unlocking the Full Power of Your CoPilot and Hub. This will be presented today at 2 o'clock, tomorrow at 2 o'clock, and then finish up on Thursday at 2 o'clock, and those are all 2 p.m. Yeah, you're lucky enough to have the presenters of the wonderful consultant trainer Cody Henson. Lives out of Ohio, and myself, Jason Robinson, the training consulting manager, and I live down in Georgia. I'm going to share my screen real quick just to show you a little bit how to navigate some of the features we have on the platform here. I think that's not going to be the right one, Here we go. Bear with us on the technology. I think you guys should be able to see the webinar screen. So we're going to hold all questions to the chat box. So down here on the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A is what it's called. It's not exactly chat. So we can put questions and answers there. The chat box is more for me and Cody. So if you have any questions, you can put them in here in the chat box, and I'll see them, or Cody will see them. We'll try to answer those as best we can. You can also do reactions here. You can raise your hand if you got a question, or just to get our attention, or if you agree with something. That would be wonderful. So with all that being said, I am going to turn it over to Cody. All right, I see the boxes, the thumbs up. Good.
All right, thank you, Jason. I'm gonna switch over to sharing.
Okay. I got to stop sharing. There you go.
All right, thank you for that. So starting out with just our CoPilot screen, I've already got this job running. So have this running already, populating some data. Now this is a virtual CoPilot that I'll be navigating. So this is rerunning or repopulating data from a run that was done. So it's a repeating data set that you'll be seeing on this. But starting to navigate some common pages that you'll see or we'll be using. If we go to our menu button up in the top corner, the job dashboard is a screen that if you have a CoPilot, you're probably familiar with. Likely have your cards set up in some ways that you want. So this is set up in a manner that I had predetermined so we could go through some cards that are useful to most users. So we'll be starting with the cycle graph, and I'll try to point out some differences between how I navigate using a mouse and how you may navigate using touch, because there will be some differences. When I start to look at the cycle graph, about wanting to make this bigger, you can grab this icon in the center and you can begin to reshape and resize the tiles, the windows, the cards as you would like. Or another common way to do it, I'm going to double click somewhere on the cycle graph. You would double tap on your touch screen and that will bring it full screen. So if I double tap again somewhere, I'll go back to my card view. I could either drag this over to get full screen, double tap to get back, double tap to get full screen. So starting with our cycle graph in full screen, we've got several curves here. And when we can pull out our curves to look at what they are. Look how we've identified them. But you can start to isolate just the curves that you want to see. If I'm clicking to hold, you would just push to hold, and that will isolate just the curve that you're looking for, which can be kind of useful sometimes when there's lots and lots of data curves on your screen. If you do pull out the curve menu, you can click and drag out a curve, and that will hold it out instead of you holding down the curve. That kind of isolates the curve and holds it there, so you don't have to hold your finger there. So we've got a click to hold or a slide out to hold if you want to isolate a curve. Now, if you want to change what curve you're looking at within this curve menu, expanding it, we have an add remove. So if this is too many curves, you could click remove and just remove a couple of the curves that maybe you're not interested in to try to clean up the view. If you're really only interested in cavity 1 for some reason today, right, you could just look at the post gate and end of cavity for curve 1. And slightly different than isolating, this in some ways kind of cleans up the graph just so there's not so many lines drawing on top of each other. The curves are not gone, they're just hidden from your view, so you can go back to add and you can select any machine curves that you would be interested in, any mold curves that you may be interested in, or composite values from data collected on the CoPilot. If you want to choose an additional curve, you can just select your curve and then the location and click done, and you will have that curve added to your screen. When you navigate, you may touch the screen to kind of place this cursor. I'm going to be clicking around and moving. But when you place the cursor in a location, you can start to pull values that we care about from the CoPilot. So you may be seeing some values for the stroke, some values in plastic specific pressure for the hydraulic. This is the holding pressure portion of the curve, and then we've got post gate and cavity pressure. And as you click in different locations, or for me, I have to hold my mouse and move them, I can start to get different values. As the curves populate, the values will change. Another subtle difference between using a mouse and touchscreen is when you go to zoom in and look at specific portions of the graph in greater detail. So using a mouse, I'm going to pull out my curve menu. I'm going to remove my stroke velocity just to keep things the same. And now with a mouse, need to select time range. With a touch screen, you can pinch and zoom in this area, this time ruler that we have along the bottom, to select your scale and zoom in. I don't have that option with a mouse, so I will be selecting my time range. And once I do that, I now have control over which portion of this segment I'm looking at. So if I want to focus more on the back pressure segment, the screw recovery, I can slide that down. If I want to focus more on the fill and pressure stage, I can slide it over. But sometimes we really want to look closely at maybe the fill stage. So with a mouse, I'm going to drag my ending time window closer. And when I let off, I have a more detailed zoomed in view of what's happening during the fill as the pressure builds, going in to finishing filling the cavity. Once you've selected your time range, if you're with a mouse, you need to select done. Again, with a touchscreen CoPilot, you will use this bar across the bottom in a pinch to zoom manner, like we're used to with touchscreens. So I'm going to reselect my time frame and go back to looking at more of the entire cycle. So while you're in this screen, let me click done on the time frame. This is where you would want to set your fill volume. So if I take my curves away, just so we can see, this tab on this side, if I pull it out, this is where I can reset or set my fill volume. So if you're running a D2 process and you have a machine triggering, this isn't as critical. But if you are running a D3 process, this is what tells the CoPilot that fill has stopped and that the pressure stage has begun. Because without a trigger from the machine, the CoPilot doesn't have a sense of when that happens unless we tell it when it happens. So for this, I would look, typically look at my red fill pressure, see where it peaks, and also look at my screw and where it stops traveling quickly and goes a little bit slower, but continues to push forward. So right around this area is where I would set or reset. So when I reset, it just blanks it out. And then I set my fill volume there. So if in a D3 process, now the CoPilot can differentiate and derive a fill time based on the position that we set as the fill volume. So that is a brief overview of our cycle graph. And I will double click to bring us back to our card menu. I'd like to talk.
Cody?
Yes.
Cody, can you show us how to do overlays on the cycle graph?
Yes. So I will, instead of double clicking, I will kind of click and drag like you might with your finger, expand this big, and in the same menu that we selected our fill volume, we need to open that menu and then we can turn on overlays. So overlays will continue to map the curves on top of themselves cycle after cycle. Now in this scenario, I'm running a virtual CoPilot set of data. So this set of data is going to be very stable and very repeatable. But you can slowly start to see that my red line is slightly thicker. And that is the very subtle variations, even in this stable process, starting to show themselves. So showing overlays and either making changes or using overlays to detect changes can be very useful. It can be a time-saving method if you're, say, trying to achieve gate seal with a CoPilot, and you can use overlays to see that. But it can also help you detect when things are changing in your process as these lines get thicker and shift in different directions. That can clue us in to something changing in our process, whether it was a subtle variation in our material lot to lot over time or something larger. So to remove overlays, my lines are slightly thicker, a little bolder than they were, but in this data set, you're not going to see a large variation. When I'd like to hide overlays, it's this quick action menu. You can hide the overlays, and it just returns you to the previous cycle that it had graphed. Okay, so bringing up our card menu, the next card to discuss would be the previous cycle values. So same method, you can enlarge this way or double click. And I chose to have these cards up, before I get too far. If I didn't want the previous cycles, I could click on this menu here with this several dots, and that's my card selection view. So these are various cards that we will look at in these webinars. Today, the focus will be on cycle graph, previous cycles, alarm settings, and summary graphs. So expanding our previous cycles, I can double tap, double click, and we have to decide, what things matter to us here. You can add different values that maybe are important to you or to your organization. Think of some common ones, that we see people chart. And if I back up for one moment, as I select things, what I've selected turns black to show me that I'm on that menu. And then as I go across the menus, once I've selected stroke length, then it turns green. Once I go to cycle time, you'll see cushion turn green, which indicates that that's, a value I've selected to monitor. So clicking cycle time, that tells me cushion being green, that it is selected and good. Yeah, maybe you care about the cycle time, the cushion, and the fill time, right? And we can save. You can go back and add more. Maybe you wanted some mold values, that you were interested in. You could look at cavity fill time for specific cavities, balance cavity fill time. There's cycral integrals that we could look at. If I just pick on one cavity here. So some different options that you can have available heads up at a glance. You may notice that there's a template value here. So as we start to talk about templates, one of the things that the previous cycles will offer you is if you have a template loaded, it will tell you the difference from that template. Again, in my scenario, my data is repeating, stable run, so my template would look like a perfect match. But if you have a template, you can start to track variations, comparing it to the template value, deriving a difference from that template value. Add and remove, similar. If you decided you didn't want something, once you click remove, you now get this removal menu that you can just click on the minus button and hit apply and change what values that it displays. Double clicking or making it smaller by this. And I know a lot of us are tasked with checking our machines daily, recording certain values, either to hubs or to other documents, production recording systems. So can be very useful if you can just have those heads up values that you're responsible for in a card, can help you go to machine a little faster if that's something that you have to do. Another card that we have is our alarm setting card. So this was the card I chose for the corner. Double click, they all function the same of double clicking to expand, double tapping to resize. And I've cleared here just to show you that you can decide which alarms that you would like to post, what alarms you would like to put boundaries around. And as we talk about alarms, right, it's important to think about the stability of our process. Similar to documenting the process, we do that when it's stable and when we've had a run in auto for sustained amount of time, and alarms need to be thought of in the same way. Setting alarms around an unstable process, right, will just have us chasing ourselves. So always keeping in mind the stability of a process before we decide to set alarms. But since we have a stable process on repeat, we can go ahead and hit the add button and look at some of the alarms that we may want to put some boundaries around. Maybe you have a cushion monitoring issue, or that's a prerogative that you are doing at your company. So maybe cushion length is something you want to alarm around, cycle time, fill time, right? It's just some very basic ones, machine alarms. And then you can decide which mold alarms make sense to you for what you are trying to accomplish. Maybe we want the average peak pressure at the end of cavity. So depending on when your alarms are activated, they may need a moment or two to collect some additional data. This CoPilot has been running long enough to populate all of that data. So once you have set your alarms or decided which alarms matter to you, we can go in and look at the previous cycle, and we can start to think about some sort of upper or lower limit, maybe that we want to put some warning band that is going to cue maybe a chute or a robot to deliver the product to another location for some additional inspection. Looking at this, I'm going to try to, when you set these values, you need to run the study, right, and verify these numbers. But if I'm averaging 9,200, 9,286 for this cycle, I would run less and less pressure until I made sinks in my part, right? Until I saw a short shot. And then set that lower limit just above that, with the idea being that if it's going to kick it out before it's short, it's definitely going to kick it out when it's short, right? So kicking out suspect parts, not just waiting until you have a large part of, a large chunk of the part missing. We want to have some boundary before that. So in this example, I'll say that I ran that and I got a short shot at 8,500 PSI. So I raised it to 8,800 to where I got sinks. So I would say my lower limit is 8,800. I know if I have above that, I have a full packed out part. There and below, I start to have sinks, and I don't want sinks, let alone shorts, to reach my operator. I want those to get additional inspection in case. So that is the lower limit. The upper limit needs to be ran in a similar way, where you add pressure until you know you're out of dimensions, or you're out of weight, or you have some defect that you're not looking to make, and then set that upper limit slightly below that. So just for conversation's sake, maybe I say that's 9,500 for this example. Once you've made your decisions, you can click save. And it tells you up here that alarm settings have been saved. Changes will take effect into the next cycle. So there are some other ways to set alarm limits. If you click the edit icon again on something else, there is a calculator icon. And if you click that, you do have the option to set an alarm by a sigma value that you determine, or by some percentage value. So those are other ways that you can capture an alarm. And you may notice that the sigma is selectable and the percentage is not. That is because in this example, I do not have a template loaded. So if I did, and when we do talk about templates, I could set an alarm based around the percentage of change from the template. Going into template matching and repeatability of processing. That's an option that you could set your alarm around. A sigma value that you determined, or a percentage based off a template value. So just to throw a couple more limits on there, let's say if you get below 0.15, and we want to be alerted for that. Clicking save. Alarm settings will take effect next cycle. So if I resize my menu, I grab the little square icon up here. I could also click. Brings me back to what we're used to seeing. If you're in alarm settings and you just you can't figure out where to double click, or maybe this little icon got lost, you can always click the menu bar above it along the CoPilot where we start our jobs, and go back to job dashboard that way also, which will take you back to this kind of menu. So next card that we would want to talk about is the summary graph. Double clicking to expand, and I've removed all of the different graph options so we can look at them and decide what we might be interested in. If I down in this corner, I have the add and remove. So if I want to add some things that are interesting, we'll kind of keep the theme here of cushion, cycle time, maybe fill time. Sure. Just looking at some different, we'll do peak pressure, end of cavity, we'll pick on cavity 1. So because my CoPilot has already been running, it has data up here to show us. And I have a time ruler, the time ruler that we have seen across the bottom for the cycle graph. I can slide that along the top. You can see this job has been running for a little while. And looking here, because we set various alarm bands, we can start to see high-low limits, these dotted lines above various stepping charting that it's doing. So if I just look at cushion stroke length and run my cursor along here, I can see a high and a low average, and then the green checkbox is my actual. So cushion's very stable, 0.26, just trying to look and focus on the top one. Same across the bottom, shows my cycle time with the average above and average below. The cushion and stroke length lines look relatively flat. Even when you zoom in, right, they still look relatively flat, the top two lines. If we look at the fill time, this third line, we do start to see some steps. They may not be large because we have to account for the scale here, but if I follow along 0.2, then we drop down to 0.20, 0.21, and we go up to 0.22. So it's not a large change, but each one of these are kind of scaled for themselves. But if you can follow along the steps, those can start to point to where things actually shifted. Ideally, we would all want flat, perfect lines with little to no deviation. If I go back into picking which alarms, we have some, it will show you with defined alarm limits. I'm going to select these two values. I don't have any trends with triggered, but I can select these two values. And when I go back to done, you zoom out just a little bit here. Anywhere that I did deviate from an alarm will start to show up with these keys at the bottom. So I set my alarms, so I'm within them. But if I started to drift, these little dots along the bottom key, the warnings, alarms, and changes, these warnings and alarms can start to appear along the bottom here. So where my cursor is, there's one for a change. So, and that's likely where I added the alarms. So if for conversation educational sakes, if I go back to alarms, that's previous cycles, we're going to go back to alarms, and I'm going to make this fail. Save. I'm going to edit the cycle time, make that fail, so I'm putting it above the cycle. Alarm setting saves, so I need to wait a cycle or two for these to take effect. But going back to my summary graph, once these take effect, see I have an additional blue line and blue dot showing that I made some change. These will eventually alarm. I see one red dot started to populate. But as this continues to run and populate data, because I've intentionally selected a value to trigger an alarm just to illustrate how this summary graph can be used. And we'll have a series of red dots as it continues to run a stable cycle outside of the parameters that I defined. I can let that go back for a moment. Not only will we see it on our summary graph, but we will start to see it in multiple places on our CoPilot to try to alert us that something has changed and that we need to evaluate what has changed in our process, especially if we did not make any process changes, what variable outside has affected the plastic conditions. So I've got my previous cycles is now unhappy, turned red, trying to indicate that something has gone wrong. My alarm settings, as you would expect, now displays in red, trying to get my attention. And in the summary graph, we are starting to see some red lines and data points as I zoom in close and just look at this section. Right, so this blue bar aligns with these dots indicating where I added these alarms to intentionally trigger them. And looking at the fill time, now you see we've got these data points that are red that are indicating they are outside of our alarm condition. So we'll continue to plot alarm points until the issue is addressed or the alarm setting is verified. So if we're matching our templates, we need to verify that no one did what I did and went in and maybe not intentionally, but set an alarm boundary incorrectly. So now we're triggering an alert condition where it's not necessarily a process change, it's just a settings for the alarms. So that is our brief overview of our CoPilot cards and our common screens. Trying to look at the cards and screens that we are most likely to see and most likely to use, and some ways to navigate and hopefully utilize the cards so we can take advantage of the system and make it work for us.
Cody,
Yes.
I did have a question or two come in. Thank you for that. That was a wonderful presentation. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to put those in the Q&A box. But a couple questions, and these are very common questions, but worth going over. So one question is can you change the color of the curves? And that is most likely coming from someone who has used eDarts in the past. And the eDart, yes, you could change the curves to almost an infinite number of colors. But with the CoPilot, the answer is no. We cannot change them. They have a color code standard, so all post gates are some variation of green, all end of cavities are some variation of blue, injection pressure is red, and the stroke volume curve is going to be that purple color you see there. Very good question. Another one that has came in is how many sensors can you connect to the CoPilot? Pretty common question, and there's not a black and white answer. So it's approximately 30 sensors. And the reason I say approximately is it comes down to every sensor that we connect, and that includes mold sensors and like a hydraulic sensor and a stroke sensor. Each of those sensors draw a certain number of amps. So the port that all these sensors connect to has a maximum amp draw. So it's approximately 30, but it depends on the type of cavity pressure sensor you're using. So if you get anywhere close to 30, I would say 25 or above, we can look at each sensor you have and do a spreadsheet and figure out if for the type of sensors you have, if it actually is 32 or 30, or maybe you can put as many as 40. It depends on the exact type of sensors and the number of sensors. Another question is can you manually scale the curves? And that is definitely coming from a former eDart user, I think. With the eDart, you could manually scale the curves, but with the CoPilot, that feature is not here. it auto scales every cycle. And sometimes when you first start up a job, and the first couple cycles of data, the scaling can look really really messed up. But if you give it a 2-3 cycles, it will generally, well, I'd say pretty much all the time, scale appropriately. And what it tries to do, it tries to scale the injection pressure, the peak. Usually it's the peak transfer pressure to be the highest point on the visual graph. Sometimes when we have like we're kind of an oddball sensor called a mold deflection sensor, the numbers are so small, the scaling can look a little odd, but the values are correct. So good thing to keep in mind when you're looking at this data, like Cody showed you when he was zooming into the summary graph. You can zoom way in and data can look really bad because of the scaling, but just keep that in mind on the cycle graph too. Sometimes some of the sensors will show at very low on the bottom of the viewing area, but if you put your cursor there and hold it down, it'll show you the actual value. So I think that's all the questions that I received. Does anyone have any questions right now they'd like to pose to us in the chat box or the Q&A box? I have a question for the folks in the room here. How many people currently have CoPilots in use? Should be able to type in that Q&A box. Right, it's up there with the chat, Q&A, and polls. Somebody has 4 CoPilots, all right. All right, thank you, Robert. One last thing. There will be a recording of this webinar. I forgot to state that at the beginning. I don't know exactly how you're going to get it, but it is being recorded, and it's probably an automatic thing, so automatically send it to you. If not, we will manually send it to you. Keep it. This is kind of my fault. I started the webinar like 35 minutes early, so the recording will be for the whole 35 minutes. So if you get the recording and you want to show it to someone else, just be aware the first half hour, maybe a little bit more, will be just a screensaver, and that's my fault. So you can just skip till you start seeing things and hearing people talk. I do want to put one thing in the chat box for you folks. One more thing. It's a link to a bunch of installation videos that we have on YouTube. And this will take you to our YouTube channel, and it's the sub-channel for only installation videos. So this webinar is not about installation. It's just about basic use, but these videos are very, very helpful. And we just walk you through each of the components and how to install each one. And they're separate videos per component, so you can look at the ones that you need to look at. Well, looking forward to tomorrow. Tomorrow will be, Cody's going to focus on templates. He talked about it a little bit today, but more in detail about templates, how to use them, what they mean, things like that, best practices, talk about how the balance sphere works, notes, and a few other things we may drop in there. And then I'll finish up on Thursday, and I'll be talking more about the hub. So the hub is our server, and we just call it the hub, and it's where all the data goes that the CoPilot collects. It stores it all on a server, and we'll look at the software, how to view and analyze and retrieve previously ran data. With that, I guess we will conclude, and we thank you very much for attending today. And if you have any friends that want to come tomorrow, please, or you want to come back tomorrow, please, you're more than welcome. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate your time.